Hello YouTubers. So this is the picture that we're going to be painting today. That was it in its finished form. Okay, slightly different to how I've done these YouTube clips before, in that I've actually done this one in real time. A few things I've sort of sped up a little bit, such as this initial drawing out stage, but mostly it's in the actual time that we did it, very slightly sped up, just to get it under, well, to get it close to an hour. I think it's an hour and a quarter. So I'll talk you through each of the stages that we're doing as we go along. Obviously I'm not speaking live as I did it, because yeah, I can't do two things at once. It's just how it is. So anyway, drawing out the picture at the moment. So this is a picture of my dog, Sky. This was taken on a beach down here in Cornwall, in Watergate Bay, a few weeks ago. So quite a nice picture, and the dog was really excited. We'd been playing ball for ages, and the ball was just out of camera shot towards the front there, and it was the look of sort of excitement on a face that we wanted to get across in this particular picture. So start quite a lot of paintings in this particular way, which is just by sketching them out. Now I know not all painters do this, you know. Some will sort of sketch an outline, perhaps using a watery paint, you know, something like burnt umber or something like that. I tend to use this sort of technical pencil, this graphics pencil, which you can see I keep having to ratchet lead forward on it, and I do that just because it helps to sort of get the ideas down onto the canvas, or the board in this case, and gets me thinking about the actual task that I've got going ahead. So as I'm sort of sketching all of these things down, I'm thinking about shading, I'm thinking about how I want to approach the actual drawing, where I want my horizon lines to be. I'm thinking about things that I'm going to miss out as well. So some of the things that are in the original photograph that I'm painting, I don't necessarily want them in this image, you know, so some of the details, etc. With this particular painting, I'm not trying to do a total photo version of it. Yeah, I'm not trying to paint the photo exactly as it is, because frankly there isn't really that much point in doing that. I like it to look painterly, for want of a better word. So this is a monochrome picture that we're going to do. And I'm putting down some colours just to start with. So that's burnt umber that I've just placed onto the palette. I'm using palette paper, which is just because this picture was only going to be painted for a short period of time. So I think I did it over 2 days. Sometimes if I'm doing a painting for longer than that, I won't use palette paper. I'll actually put it onto a proper palette. And then I can sort of put that in the fridge, which will make the paint last a lot longer. So mixing up using this palette knife, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to pre-mix my colours. So I'm taking the white. In this case, this is a small amount of zinc white. It's not titanium white, this. So zinc white is quite opaque. Okay, so it's not as strong a white as titanium white. And why am I using that? Well, I just thought I'd experiment, actually. Okay, just a bit of an experiment, this one, rather than using titanium white. You can see I put some burnt umber in there. That's just to warm the shades of grey that I'm making here. Okay, because black and white and shades of grey can be pretty cold, really. So I put a little bit of burnt umber in there, in the hope that that will warm it a little bit. And as you can see, I'm putting the different ratios of black to white as we go along. So the black that I am using is, I'm just going to have a look in the drawer next to me because I can't remember, lamp black for this particular painting. So this is lamp black, and I'll tend to mix, when we're doing a monochrome or a black and white image, I tend to try and mix perhaps 13, 14 different shades of grey. In this case, what have we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 8 shades at the moment. But you'll see, I will, as I mix them, I will tend to add shades on the palette as we go along. So if there's a particular shade that I want that I haven't quite mixed, I'll choose two close sort of shades and take a small amount of each and mix them together. As you can see, my mixing method is don't know, it's not the greatest, but it works. There's a bit of glare on the actual palette here, so the colours are a lot more defined actually than you can see in this image. So there's a lot of light shining. There's a fluorescent light in this studio at the moment, and that's what you can see shining in the reflection of the wet paint. But they are mixed as quite a solid colour, each of these. And as you can see, I just like to, again, by mixing it this way and getting it laid out on the palette first, it gives me time to think, you know, and all the time while I'm doing this I'm looking at the image on the computer. So I'm painting from an image that I can see on the screen of the computer, and I'm looking at that and you know, making sure that I've got shades that are going to be suitable and enough different shades of grey in order for the painting to be made. As you can see, I'm sort of working my way along and adding different shades as we go and mixing the different values together throughout the palette. So using zinc white was a bit of an experiment because zinc white is not the one, not a white that gets used all that much, I don't think. It tends to be titanium white because it's a colour that's, well, more readily available for a start. Yeah, it seems to be quite a common colour to actually be able to find and to buy, and it's you know, so it's a much stronger white. It doesn't fade. Zinc white, I found, you know, you put it onto the canvas and it gives you a nice strong white colour. Or, well, it gives you a nice strong white. I wouldn't say white colour. It gives you a nice strong white, but it tends to sort of fade back, I would say. So this was a bit of an experiment for me because I haven't really used it in this sort of capacity before in such a big way. I've used it for a few things where I want to just put a white sort of or, you know, to highlight something, or just put a small amount of white onto something, but without it dominating the picture. You know, so not for highlights and that sort of thing, just a small amount where I just want to add a subtle white to it. Okay, so zinc tends to fade back, zinc white tends to fade back. So it's not great if you wanted to do something like, I don't know, add a really strong white highlight as the lightest colour on a particular painting, and you wanted to put I don't know, let's say something like a wave or something like that, where you wanted to show the spray of a wave and you wanted that spray to be the lightest thing on your picture and to really stand out and to lift from the actual canvas. Zinc white is not really great at doing that, I don't think, anyway. Okay, it's kind of a much more sort of I don't know, it's not as strong a colour. Okay, so I've got sort of half of my palette colours mixed there, adding a bit more of the white on there, mix a few more colours in, and then we're going to be getting into the actual painting of this. As you can see, I'm just pulling a bit of the paint from the previous mix there, mixed quite a lot of that, and I'm just going to sort of blend this a little bit lighter on this top section of my palette. And I'll continue to make that lighter as we go around, not putting a lot of burnt umber in any of this, only the burnt umber that's in the existing colour that I'm mixing in, because I don't really want to be making light brown. I do want it to appear as a grey rather than anything else. Many people will not, they won't pre-mix their colours, they'll just mix them as they're going along. And you know, sometimes I guess I will also do that. I'll just mix colours as we go, and as you see, as we're painting this, I will sort of mix other colours on the palette, you know, shades that I don't necessarily have available. Okay, so this is Liquin. This is what I'm using as my medium. So I like Liquin. It's a really good medium. It's an alternative to, you know, linseed oil and things like that, but it helps the drying of the painting. It helps the painting to dry quicker. So as you can see, I've sped this part up a little bit and quite a bit of the painting. So this is actually, it's not double speed, but it's you know, perhaps a speed and a quarter fast. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm blocking in. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with this. So I've blocked in the black already. Okay, and I'm using a brush with a wedged tip onto it. Okay, so it wasn't initially that sort of brush. The brush was actually a filbert, and I got some scissors to it and I cut it to make it into a wedge. I find that that sort of brush is really useful for doing this. So I'm looking at the picture, looking at my painting, and I'm looking for the darkest areas, and I'm painting in those dark areas to start with, just adding them in. I'm trying to get colours that are as close as, say colours, I apologise, I'm trying to get values that are as close as possible to what I can see in the original painting, in the original picture rather, photograph. And what I'll then do is, once I've blocked in the base colours, I'll then start to build layers on top of that. Now what I'm noticing as I'm using the zinc white is that, and you may see this as well in the actual YouTube video, that what appears to be is quite a strong white at first will start to fade back a little, you know, and so it was kind of a bit of a battle using this particular white to make highlights, because they were always fading back after they'd been painted on. Later on I interact towards the end when I do need some highlights, so sort of like on the teeth of the dog. I think there's some highlights sort of on the paws, on the legs, on the eyes. I did use a very small amount of titanium white to do that, because it just wasn't possible to do it actually with zinc white. It just wasn't going to, although it would appear as white on the palette, on the picture, it would then fade. The style we're going for with this is a painterly style. Okay, so I was aiming to paint this in such a way that from a distance it appeared as quite a detailed image, quite a detailed painting, and as you got closer, the aim was that you would be able to see all of those individual brush marks, and hopefully you will be able to see that in the finished painting at the end. There's the picture, and there's the blocked in so far. Okay. So this is oil paint on canvas board. Okay, you can probably see that I've painted over this with a white gesso. There was an old picture on this, didn't want it anymore, so I've actually painted it over with a white gesso. But you can probably see there in that image, you can see the brush marks on the white gesso, and I did leave them on purpose. I didn't really want to sand it back, so I painted over it, and some of those brush marks that you can see there are from the previous painting. Okay, but I quite like that texture as it came through, you know. I just don't always do it this way, but you know, I painted the white onto it, just to flatten the colour back, and to give me a blank canvas. But I quite liked having some of those previous marks still there, you know. I didn't want to completely erase it back and then sand the gesso back to make a very flat surface. I wasn't that bothered about that. This was an exercise in trying out different techniques and things and different paints, so it wasn't that critical. So as you can see, continuing to block in, adding more and more details as we go along. The lamp black is also a black that's not seen all that much, I don't think. I know people do use it quite a lot, but it tends to be things like midnight black that gets used. Lamp black, I quite like it. I find it's not a really dark black colour. It's not a completely black colour. It always seems to have I don't know, it's kind of like it's like a shade. The darkest lamp black always seems to be like a shade lighter. Okay, so what I've got there, I've got a brush that I'm going to now use, well, I will be using to do some blending. So I've got my blocking in. I'm doing my final bits of blocking in, but you might have just seen there I was showing you the brush that I'm going to use for blending some of these blocked in colours together. That's how I'm cleaning the brush. I'm not using thinners as I paint, I'm just wiping the paint off onto that paper towel that you could see there. I find that at this stage there really isn't much need to be cleaning the brush every 5 minutes, and you know, white spirits or any other sort of cleaning liquid that you use just stinks. It's just horrible. So I try not to use it. Really. Well, at the final stages, in order to totally clean the brushes, I'll use it. But there are alternatives. You can just use soapy water, really. I mean, that'll clean oil off brushes, no problem. Dish soap, or washing powder type soap will clean oil paint off brushes pretty well too. Okay, so I'm blending in. I'm going to blend some of these values together. Also, at this stage, actually, in this blending in, I'm also trying to put some of the fur into the picture, which is why when I'm blending it in the direction that the fur was in the original photograph, because I'm just going to continue to build layers on top of what we have here, in order to get as much depth into this painting as possible. So when you look at it in detail and closely, you can still see some of these original blended brush marks. They're still there, and you know, that's quite important, because in this painterly sort of style I did want to build layers one onto the other with some undercolours underneath that were different to the colours that were going to be put on top, and you know, just to really make it quite a deep painting. Also, there's nothing more boring and tedious, I would say, than painting every single piece of fur on a painting like this. Some people will, but you know, life's too short to do that, isn't it, really? Painting every single piece of fur. We put some in, but only the ones that are standing out in the original picture. So hopefully you can see there now we've got the sort of the highlights and the low lights, I guess, in the actual painting. Okay. Again, this, you know, it's quite a big brush, that, isn't it? I think it's a you know, an inch blending brush there. But we don't need to be accurate at this stage. This is just putting colour. This is just putting values and shades onto the actual canvas. eliminating any original canvas now by just painting over any sections where there was still the original gesso showing through. Okay. You might be wondering why it looks like the dog's wearing some sort of weird contraption around its chest, and it was. That's what its lead attaches to. I could have taken it out, could have removed it from the original photograph, but I thought, you know, it was there at the time, and I thought, yeah, we'll leave that in. It's not a problem. You know, it would probably look quite nice, and also, you know, I just thought it'd be. It reminds you of the day that we were out. You know, the day of going out and walking the dog, and you know, these sort of paintings I'll keep. This painting in particular, I will keep forever, I would say. So it's an opportunity to look back and go, oh yes, of course, that's how you know, how we used to have to walk them using that thing, because she'd pull your blooming arm off if she wasn't wearing it. Right, there we go. So we've got some colours in there. Hopefully you can see that it's quite blocky, it's quite basic at the moment, but you can see some fur, lines of fur in how we've blended them in. So back to the chisel tip wedged shaped brush, okay, and just going around dropping in some blocks of colour now. So finish the big blocking out, and now this is the blocking with slightly more detail, I would say. Okay, so it's still blocking, putting blocks of colour on, but using a small brush and focusing more on the details. So it's kind of the process that I use with this is I'll put big blocks of colour first, blend them in, then go back and then add smaller blocks of colour, a little bit more blending in, and then I'll go into even more detailed additions of I keep wanting to say colour. It's not colour, is it? It's black and white. But you know what I mean. I keep adding shades and tones, going from, yeah, so sort of the macro picture, if you like, you know, putting in the big blocks and then working my way along. And so over the whole of this image, big blocks, and then adding a little more detail, and then more detail again, and just keep layering it up, building it up, and you know, working on it. And I find that the more that I do this, I spot in details and things in the picture that I don't necessarily see the first time round. It's always good to keep looking at it and going back and adding a bit and you know, and adding little details into it. So as you can see here, I'm looking at the picture on the computer all the time, and I'm adding dark into it again. So I've gone back to my darkest colours, and I've sort of worked my way up against the lightest. I tend to always do it that way, really. I sort of go dark to light, dark to light, dark to light. So in as many layers as I want. First layer, dark colours progressing, or dark shades progressing to lighter. Then the next layer, dark colours again, progressing through to light colours, and then third or fourth layer, or however many, dark, and then building on top. That's the beauty of doing it in oil paint, really, is that you can do that. Okay, so a bit more detail on there now, as you can see, and we'll continue to build on that. So some of the fur on the dog's face has got some real highlights to it here. The sun was catching on the dog's face at the top there, and I just put some little spots of white onto there, and I will blend them out, but some of them will remain even when I blend them. Some of them will remain there, and they will add a layer that gets some paint on top of it, but they will always be there, so it'll give that deeper look to the actual fur. Same again, adding some highlights where the sun was reflecting on individual sort of strands of fur, just dotting them in. No real great accuracy there in doing that, just putting it in as a reminder to myself, really, as much as anything, that there's some lighter bits there to consider as I continue to paint. So this painting I actually did over 2 sessions, so one on a Saturday and next on a Sunday, and I wanted time for the existing paint that was already on there to dry for the second session, and that was largely just to give me the chance to go back and look at it on the second day with fresh eyes, because you can work a painting too long without giving it a break sometimes, you know. And so it was to give me a chance to do this, to look at it with fresh eyes and say, okay, let's add this to it, or let's add that to it. So this is we're still actually in the first session here. I think the first session, this painting that you can see up to this point, I think had probably taken maybe, well, less than an hour, I would say, up to this point. So probably 45 minutes, something like that, to get to this point here. That's not including the time it took to draw it out with a pencil. Okay, so it's just putting paint on, 45 minutes or so. Again, this is just throwing highlights in of where the light was catching. Obviously you go over these later. I was looking at the tongue of the dog there, and as you can see, the colour of the tongue, the shade was actually blending in quite a lot with the fur that's underneath the dog's muzzle there, underneath his chin. So I was sort of looking at the photo in quite a bit of detail now and thinking, okay, how can I adapt this and change it? Because actually, in reality, in the black and white original photograph, it really did blend in. So I was trying to think, well, okay, do we make this lighter? Do we make it darker? Do we make the tongue darker? How extreme do we need to be in order for this to show? And I think just by adding that small amount of zinc white, you can now see that it's made it less it made it more obvious that the tongue was separate. It wasn't the same object on there. And sometimes you've got to do that, you know, sometimes you've got to look at an image and sort of say, okay, well that's not going to work if I paint it. And that was the case with that, so I lightened the chest there in order for the tongue to not blend in the black and white image. That's the freedom of painting, isn't it? You know, that's what you can do. So this is the final section here that was with the original gesso colour coming through, which is this sort of badge that's on, I don't know what you'd call it really. It's like a whole body lead thing to stop the dog from pulling it down the road at 100 miles an hour. I guess that's not its technical name, but that's what we call it for a moment. It's like a harness, I suppose, yeah. But, you know, whatever its real name is, who knows. But we're just looking at the perspective of this now and changing it and tweaking it a little bit, because it wasn't quite correct. It wasn't quite right on the original drawing. Those artists out there, if the people that are watching this, if they are you know, accomplished artists and things, you might be thinking, crikey, why is he holding the paintbrush like that, you know? And I know that you know, there's very specific ways in which some people will hold a brush, and they're quite sort of like, oh, you've got to hold it in a particular way, and you've got to do this and that and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, good, really, I'm very pleased for those people. That's good for them. I'm happy for that. However, I find that the freedom and that I get from just using the brush in whichever way I find comfortable, you know, that helps me quite a lot. And I'm not, you know, I am not a trained artist. You know, there's no art school and things that have gone into this. You know, in my training, I'm a designer. I'm a teacher. You know, I'm a designer. It's but my designing is technical. I'm more of a technical sort of designer. You know, and the painting side of it is, you know, that's a fairly new, I would say, fairly new sort of thing for me. So I've only been, you know, I've only been painting for 2 years. So you know, my technical ability in the way that I use the brushes and things will be very different to someone who is extremely skilled in art. But ultimately, I think the outcome is the important thing rather than the actual way in which we're holding the brushes. So I'm using a fan brush here, and the reason I'm doing it this way is I want to put fur on, obvious fur, and the fan brush, this particular fan brush that I've got, I find that by using the white paint and then pushing and pressing and pushing it upwards, as well as dragging and just putting highlights in, it means that I can get the effect of fur, the highlighted effect of fur, very easily. Again, I'm not interested in painting every single line of fur. That really doesn't interest me at all, because it's not the nature of this type of image that I want. I have painted where I've tried to get it absolutely as accurate and photographically as accurate as I can. You may have seen that in the some of the images that I've got on YouTube. I think I guess they are on YouTube, but certainly some of the images that are out there that I've done. So the image of the Indian girl that you may have seen, that was done to get it as absolutely accurate as I could, you know, and that really was a very long process of putting individual dots of skin texture on the face and all of those sorts of things. Okay, that's not what this painting is about at all. This is about getting a painting down nice and quick. So this is still actually on the first day, and I would say we're probably just over an hour into this particular painting now. Dragging a little bit of the colour from the foot there, accidentally dragging it into the black, And again, the fantastic oil paint, you can just paint straight over it with no concerns. So a little bit of smoothing out. Okay. Now what you've probably noticed there is that I have blocked some colour now into the background. When I was recording the painting, for some reason that particular small bit of footage where I blocked in the background there with the beach, you can probably see the sea towards the top of the screen there, just above the ear on the well, going through the ear. That's the sea, and I blocked that in, but unfortunately the footage didn't save, which is really frustrating. So yeah, we lost that, but that took about 20 minutes, so there's 20 minutes of footage there that we lost, and there's a few other little bits that I added in those 20 minutes. But what you can see now, what I'm doing is with the palette knife I'm scratching and scraping and drawing some detail in, drawing some fur that was there just by scraping back and removing some of the paints to expose the lower section. There we go, so you can see the original picture in the background there, much lighter, the original picture, but it's obviously brighter because it's on a computer screen. So I'm onto the sea now, and what I'm doing is I think I was darkening the horizon here just to make it more obvious that it was water. Whenever you paint an ocean or a horizon line like this, especially if it's water, it's really important, of course, to get it horizontal. It sounds really obvious, but you do see pictures where it's not quite horizontal, and it really looks not great if that happens. So what I'm doing is I'm going in with the black here just to add some shadow and some shade in order to add that into the water there to make that look a little bit darker. The actual putting down of the beach and everything that you can see there, I did that with a 2-inch brush, a really big 2-inch brush. So I really did just slap the shade, the values onto there, so the paint onto that. And you can probably see there in the sky, you can see that texture that I was talking about earlier from the original painting, you know, where I just painted over it. You can see some of the shadow and the shade that's in there. So again, I'm adding highlights here, and to some extent I was struggling a little bit with the zinc white paint. Oh, we're into the second day now. This is the second session of this. So I was struggling a little bit with the zinc white because it really had faded a lot. You know, overnight it had faded back a heck of a lot. So I'm pretty sure this might well be some titanium white now, because I didn't want to leave the painting again and then see that it had faded again. So you possibly remember, you know, I don't know, what was it, about 5 or 6 minutes ago in the actual YouTube clip, there was quite a lot of detail there with the fur. You know, you could see quite a bit of detail that I pushed in with the fan brush, and a lot of that had gone. You know, it had just faded back, such that you can, you know, it's now no longer there in the picture. You may also notice as well on the leg on the right hand side, you can see some scratch marks where I've sort of scratched at the side of the leg, and also on the dog's back going down towards its hind quarters. So what I was doing there is I scratched with the palette knife to remind myself to remove some paint from those areas, because in the photograph, the original photograph, the dog's legs at the front and her back is very arched. It just didn't look quite right. You know, in the photograph it was how the dog was, but it just didn't look quite right. So I scratched into there to remind myself to paint some of the beach over that particular section there in order to change the shape very slightly. Also underneath the the leg that's on the right hand side there, you can see some scratchings under there as well, to remind myself to remove that as well there, because it just made that it just didn't look quite right. Okay, so I sort of thought, right, well, I'll as a reminder for myself, when I'm next putting the background colour on, paint over these bits. So here we go, putting in the details again. So I'm on my smallest brush now. This is a really tiny brush, and this is the final sort of the final details going on, I guess. I am dotting in a few highlighted strands of fur. I wouldn't do the whole picture like this, and you can see how quickly I'm actually putting them on, just using the edge of the brush in order to put these into place. There's no long sweeping strands of fur being painted on here. This really is just giving the impression. I think this was zinc white as well, because I wanted these ones to stand out. No, sorry, titanium white, because I wanted it to stand out. If this was zinc white, it would have faded. It would, you know, you leave this for an hour or so and they would have faded back. So again, onto the fan brush in order to blend these a little bit so they're not quite so stuck on its face. Just to blend them in a touch, to add that highlight in. All the time experimenting, you know, just experimenting, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work. So I'm looking at the photo at this point and I'm trying to decide if that colour is too flat. Is there enough light and dark sections to it? And I decided there wasn't. So by putting in that paint, the white paint, and because it was titanium white, it really did dominate then when we blended it in. Okay, so what I'm doing is now going back and just putting some dark paint on there, you know, to sort of re-strengthen the shadows around that side of the face. Creating a nice picture really is all about your highlights, you know, the highlighted sections against those dark sections, you know, the how the black plays against the white, you know, having those boundaries where the two colours meet, and you know, how you go about making those two different shades, those two extremes of shade, how they sort of are painted next to each other and interplayed next to each other. You know, it's quite important. So putting that shadow back in was pretty critical, really. Otherwise, it would have just looked like a very flat face on the dog. So that's the teeth going in. That's titanium white. We drop them in because the teeth are very bright in the actual original picture, and it just helps to show where they are there. Same here with this. This is quite a dark section in the mouth. And that's the gum, the dog's gum there. So I think this is probably into the second hour on the second session with this painting now. As you can see, there's smaller details. There's various times where there's bits of the recording that I've removed where I'm sort of studying the picture and looking at it and deciding what to do and looking at it in detail, zooming in on it on the screen in order to have a look and looking at where these highlights and details are. And I'm sort of going through. So some of the times when I'm doing that, I've removed that section because it'd be very boring to watch nothing happening on the screen. So I find oil paint is a fantastic medium to use because it's so forgiving. I know a lot of people like acrylics and things, and acrylics, I like acrylic. It dries very quickly, I find, and it can be quite difficult to change things if they go wrong. So as I'm doing this mouth, for example, you see I'm doing quite a lot of brush strokes and brush marks and things going on because I'm trying to decide really if it's how I want it to be. Is it how I does it look how I want? So there's quite a few mistakes I'm looking at. I'm doing it and I'm making a mistake and I'm thinking, oh, okay, I didn't like that, I'll go back, and you can change it. And that's the wonder of, it's a wonderful thing really with oil paint, because you can just do that. You can just go back and say, okay, I did that a moment ago, I'm not happy with it. You can undo it just by removing the paint with the brush or by painting a different colour, a different shade over the top. However you wish to do it, it's incredibly forgiving, and you can look back on a painting a couple of hours later with oil paints and say, okay, I don't like that bit, I'm going to change it. And I do that regularly, so it looks like it's a continuous process of this, but I've been in and out of the room quite a lot and gone off and done other things and come back to it and done a bit of shopping and all of that sort of stuff, all the time while I'm painting this, and it means that you get fresh eyes. You have a break, you walk away, you come back, you decide how you want to change it. Various times I shall sort of quite late at night, so I'll be sort of, I don't know, relaxing, watching telly or whatever, and I think, oh, do you know what, I'm just going to have another look at the painting, and I'll go back in and I'll take a look at the painting and I'll pick the brush up and I shall make a few very small changes, put the brush back down, walk away. Okay, and that means that you don't get absolutely sick to death of staring at a painting for a start, because you can of course get frustrated when you're painting. If things aren't going exactly as you want them to be, it can be a frustrating process. It's just a case of walk away and leave it. Nothing is no mistakes are that important, I don't think, when you're painting. It really doesn't matter, it's just a picture really. But it always helps to come back and have another look the next day and see if you're still happy with it, see what you want to change, see what you want to adjust. So I'm going over this bit in black here because having looked at the original picture, there's some white fur underneath the muzzle, but it just didn't look quite right. There was something about it. I mean, maybe it looked a bit more like like a beard, I guess, more than anything. So I've put a little bit more dark into there to sort of reshape that. And now what I'm doing again, this is that process of dropping in the fur just by using small brush marks to then blend and to add that detail into it. So again, trying to avoid painting every single piece of fur, just by putting little blocks of colour in and then pushing it through. looking again for the dark sections where they are on the picture. Is my painting dark enough in that particular area? And that's what I'm asking myself, and then I'm saying, okay, that needs to be darker here, this needs to be darker there. There's not enough contrast between the light and the dark in certain areas, so let's go back, add some more dark paint into it. This particular section is very flat, which is why I'm now adding in some darker shades to try and outline where the actual leg is on the dog. And funnily enough, as I'm sat here, the dog has just walked in and curled up by my feet. Bless it. Small amounts of the painting that we just you might have just seen. I came in with a fan brush then just to add a little bit in there. Again, I lost a very small amount of the actual painting then, of the actual footage, which is very annoying. But what you might be able to see is I've dropped in again with some of the titanium white with that fan brush, just brushed over a few highlights. That's what you can see on sort of the leg that's nearest to us. You might be able to see some brush marks on there where I've just put them in. So hopefully you like this format of doing it this way, showing it slightly sped up but not time-lapsed. I don't know, there seems to be a lot of time-lapse footage on YouTube of people painting, and I think time-lapse is great, but I think it gives you more chance to see how something's actually done when it's not quite speeded up to sort of record times, you know, so sort of like a 4-hour painting being shown in 5 minutes time-lapse video. Okay, I don't think that's not that you know, it looks great and it looks really good, and you can see sort of an outcome take shape very quickly, but I thought I'd try it this way for a change and actually show it in more real time, I guess, rather than speeding everything up. This is sped up slightly because otherwise the video would be 2 hours long, or possibly more, which we don't really want. So I'm just adding detail in now. The front paws, hadn't really done anything to this since the start of the very first session on the first day, so I just blocked them in with colour just to sort of show where they were. Hadn't done a lot with it from that point onwards, so now I'm going back and just adding details in, adding colour in, battling with the zinc white to try and get it to be as nice and bright white. A difficult battle, I would say, because it's not the easiest thing to make that zinc white stand out and to give you good contrast. But you can see dropping little bits in as we go along, just to give some details there. So with all these brush strokes, I'm just trying to follow the curve of the paw or the curve of the foot. So I'm sort of angling my brush to sort of paint it in the way that the fur is actually moving on the foot. And again, you know, I'm not going for super detail here. This is really about putting paint on and then standing back and looking at it and seeing if it looks detailed, seeing if it looks accurate. It's not, this painting really wasn't about making a super accurate representation of the original photograph. Really wasn't interested in doing that. I wanted it to look painterly. I wanted it to be so that the viewer of the painting can walk up to it and look at it and say, okay, yeah, I can see all of the brush strokes in that. I can see exactly where the brush has been. I can see where the paint has been added on. I can see the thickness of the brush even. I can see how it's been applied to get the shapes. That's what I was looking for. So didn't want to hide those brush strokes and blend them all out and make it such that it looks like a photograph, because I've already got a photograph. Yeah, there's no point in reproducing that. Okay, so this is where I'm now getting rid of the sections where I scratched it out. I mentioned them earlier. I scratched some sections out to remind myself to remove them. And so what I'm doing now is just going in with this inch wide brush, or 1.25" brush, and just going over it with the same sand colour, just to get rid of those bits that I wasn't happy with. So just teasing the paint there. It's still wet. The actual black paint that I was painting over there was still wet. So as you can see, I'm working it quite a bit in order to get it to remove that dark colour. So same here, my hand in the way, but there we go. Look, so same. I'm just working it to get rid of it. Again, very forgiving oil paint, you know. So I'm just brushing that out and just trying to remove it where I scratched to get rid of it there. And this is why I love oil paint so much, is that you really can just paint this light colour on top of the dark colour and it will go. Side of the brush, just to add more paint into it. There we go. And then blending it in with the background. So we're adding in a little bit of fur on there, not such a big block of colour that it was, but just adding in some strands of fur and a few little bits there, just to add some detail really, so it doesn't look like it's just a line that stops at the dog's back. You know, you need to sort of make it obvious that the dog is not just a linear point where the paint stops on it. Okay. adding contrast. Yeah. Again with the black, just adding contrast. The the magic of painting is in the contrast between the dark and the light. So needed a little bit more there just to pull the picture out of the canvas. So it's that final section to remove, which is under here, which I scratched out, trying to get it so that it appears as this light sand shade that was underneath the dog there. And there we go, that's almost there, I would say, in terms of getting rid of those sections that we didn't want. So I hope you've enjoyed this YouTube video. As I say, I don't release videos that often, but this one's slightly different. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please do leave me a comment, give us a like. You know the score, everyone says it. Like and subscribe and all of that. But if you have enjoyed it, please do feel free to leave a comment. If you haven't enjoyed it, okay, that's fair enough. You know, not a problem. But thank you for if you've watched it all the way through this far. You've got good stamina, I would say, for watching this clip. So thank you very much. And if you have watched it all the way through, please do let me know in the comments, because that would be great. Don't often do it this particular way with narrating over the whole of the painting as it's taking shape. So if you have enjoyed it, please do let me know, and I will do more in this format. If you prefer it as a speeded up video, what do they call it, a time-lapse video as well, please let me know as well. By all means comment on that. If you think, oh okay, this would have been better if you just sped it up 5 or 6 times and done it in and showed it in 30 minutes or 20 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever, then please do say that as well. And that way when I release the next one, we'll see, I will go with the majority. I'll go with your views, and your feedback is appreciated, so please do let me know. Anyone who paints will know that you get to a point where you start adding and doing bits and adding paint on, and just small amounts, and then little tweaks and little touches and that sort of thing, and it can be you can work a painting for hours and hours and just keep going with it, especially with oil, because you can just paint a shade or any color on top of another color, and it's important to know when to sort of look at it and say, okay, that's it, don't add any more to that. So my recommendation for that is that you do that walking away, you do the leaving of it, you walk away and you come back to it and you say, am I happy with that? Yes, no, do I want to change anything? And then if you change anything, make a little change, but then walk away again, go away again from it, walk away, come back to it, decide if you are happy with it. And that's what's happening in this last section here. So I'm in between some of these brush strokes, I'm walking away for 20 minutes, half an hour. Picked that fan brush up there and did a few little strokes, and then I walked away, and then I came back with this brush probably I don't know, an hour later, perhaps, something like that. So I thought, okay, I need to define the underneath of this leg a little bit more, and then, you know, I'd walk away from it and then come back to it. And I think that might have been the case then, actually. I think I walked away from it, had a cup of tea or whatever, and walked the dog, probably. And then I had a look at it and came back and said, okay, no, that needs to be darker. That needs more contrast. Really adding the final details now. Keep coming back to it and looking at it thinking, okay, get a bit on there, a bit more fur on there, you know, add a little bit here, add a little bit there, but it's getting close now. And I remember it being close. This was, I actually painted this about 2 weeks ago. Okay, so as I'm watching it, I'm sort of reminding myself, thinking, oh yes, I remember that. So again, I was adding more contrast to sort of raise it from the background, but all the time I'm just perhaps fiddling a little bit now. And when you start to fiddle with your painting, that's the point where you start to think, okay, what do I need to do? So these final sections here is just to add a little bit more detail into the beach. Some big flat areas of the beach there, so just going through, dropping a few bits and pieces into there, a few little dark parts there, a few shadows and shades and things, just to add a little bit of interest into this beach, to show where there was shadows on the particular day. Some of those shadows weren't there, they didn't exist on the actual photograph, but that's okay, because that's what painting's all about. You don't have to reproduce a photograph, you make it as you wish. And there's a dog print there, because it seemed a bit odd that the dog was stood in sand without a paw print anywhere near, so there's a little paw print that we're putting in. And these little details hopefully will give it more interest to that background, which is quite a flat beach background to it. Okay, a relatively difficult thing to add interest to, because it's just flat, boring sand, really, I suppose. But there we go. So we've added a little bit more into there, and the same with the waves there. So seems like hours that we painted those waves, but they're still wet, so we can still add to it. And the same here now. I've got a flat sky, just going to add some clouds to it. No detail, just brush strokes, to give the impressions of clouds very fast. You know, adding a bit of shade into there, flicking it over with the fan brush there, just to blend that in with the background. Same here, just flicking that colour now to give some wisps of cloud. There were no clouds in the original picture. This was quite a lovely spring day, so there was no clouds in the sky, but there are now because we've put them in. I think a lot of people struggle to put clouds to paint clouds, and I think there's a lot of overthinking of painting clouds. You know, there's no they don't have to be fluffy white clouds. Yeah, you can just put dark colours in and they'll look like clouds most of the time. Okay. Or dark shades. So this is the titanium white that I was saying, just for those very few final highlights. very small amount of titanium white that I'm using now, just with this palette knife, and you can see how much brighter that titanium white is compared to everything else that's on the picture. It really is a bright white, and you know, it's vibrant, and it will not fade back, and that will now raise, and the aim was to really bring some of those strands of fur out of the picture, which I think it's done there. As you can see, you know, it really does look like the sunlight is catching some of those strands of fur. That would not have been possible with zinc white, and the same here. This just wouldn't have been possible to put those highlights on with zinc white. They would have been there for a short amount of time. They probably would have then, it appears to me anyway, that they would then fade. Whereas with this titanium white, it just doesn't fade. You put it on, and it's just there. It just remains. You don't really get a loss in the intensity of the shade or the brightness of it. Okay. I always tend to do these highlights as the very last thing in the painting. Pretty much always tends to be the case, and I often think of it as that's the sort of like the finishing touches, really, is putting those very bright highlights in. You know, I know that I'm nearing the end of it when I'm painting it. If I start thinking to myself, right, let's get some highlights in there, let's finish this now with some very bright sections. The light's catching on the whiskers. So like I mentioned, if you have enjoyed this, if you would like to leave a comment, please do. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for watching. If you've stayed this far, that's very much appreciated, that you've taken the time to watch this, and I appreciate your feedback. So please do let me know in the comments section. Like, subscribe if you wish to, and I shall see you on the next painting when I eventually get round to making another YouTube clip. Thank you very much.